Hi, and welcome to the Fancy Comma YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about the executive branch. In case you don't know what the executive branch is, so the US government is broken into three different branches. Legislative, which I did a legislative mukbang. The point of this is to explain to scientists where science fits in all three branches of government. And remember, they're not just federal. Every branch of government also has like lower level things. So for example, that we have the president is the head of the executive branch federally, but there's also like governors, and they're the head of, I guess I've never heard of governors being talked about as the head of the executive branch in their states, but they actually are. So today, actually, I went to 7-Eleven, and I got 2 coffees. Actually bought 1 coffee, and then as I was checking out, I was like, hey, can I get another coffee? And they were like, sure. I went and got some snacks. These pies were only $1, so I got strawberry cheesecake, Sev-Love pie, chocolate flavored snack pie. I don't think I have the energy. I woke up this morning. I slept through my meeting that I had, so I just hopped on at the very end. So then I left my house without drinking coffee. Never do that. So I know a bit about the executive branch of government and how science fits in because I almost knocked over my coffee with my headset because my like this. We're gonna try to persevere. So I know a bit about this executive branch because I learned about it at Georgetown. I took public policy for scientists, and we actually, like at the time Obama was president, the main thing he was trying to do at that time was the Affordable Care Act. So we had all these like Obama science advisors and like people that were involved in health policy come and talk to us. And some of those people are now Joe Biden's science advisors. My classmate actually went to work for the Cancer Moonshot Initiative, which is actually started by Joe Biden when he was vice president. You may know that President Obama did the BRAIN Initiative, which back in 2013 or so was going to revolutionize what we know about the brain by uniting different approaches and stuff. So pretty cool. I met one of Obama's science advisors once at the AAAS because I went to a talk and I was like, I'm going to meet Obama's science advisor. And I was just like, there's just some random guy. I forget who it was, but they advised Obama on science. Obama really liked science. Actually, all presidents, I think, I love science. The executive branch, the first science advisor was Vannevar Bush, as I talked about in my Taco Bell mukbang, talking about Congress, because Congress funds all the science funding that happens because it's all federally funded by the federal government. So the first science advisor was Vannevar Bush, and he headed in 1941, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, established the Office of Scientific Research and Development, and he picked Vannevar Bush as its leader. It had a lot of activities in World War II, like the Manhattan Project. OSRD was dissolved after World War II, and thanks to Vannevar Bush's efforts, it actually kind of became the NSF, or the National Science Foundation. So I thought the NSF might be part of the executive branch, but I looked it up, and actually the NSF is independent and does not belong to any federal agency, and it actually has its own National Science Board, which actually advises both the president and the Congress, and obviously NSF, NIH, NASA, all of those get their money from Congress every year. But the president also has his own science advisors within the White House. So the Office of Science and Technology Policy is an executive branch. My mind just blanked. The OSTP, or the Office of Science and Technology Policy, is the main decision-making body, or not decision-making. They just make recommendations. This is my honey bun. I'm supposed to open it on. Oh! So that happened. It's very good. I feel like the 7-Eleven honey bun is better than the Tasty Cake honey bun, even though I really like Tasty Cake. I think Tasty Cake is a Pennsylvanian thing. When I worked on the John Fetterman campaign, everyone was talking about how much they love Wawa. And I was like, and I feel like 7-Eleven is kind of like Wawa. We don't have Wawa in Oklahoma, obviously. But I actually interviewed to be an intern in OSTP. in the Division of Science, and also in PCAST, PCAST stands for the President's Council of Science and Technology Advisors. I used to work for the Patient Safety Movement Foundation, and I don't know what it is with today. Like, I dropped the honey bun. I'm really roughing it today. At least I have 2 coffees. I don't even need 2 coffees. Well, I definitely needed more than one, but I didn't need 2 whole ones. But yeah, PCAST. So PCAST is the President's Council of Science and Technology Advisors. And so I used to work with a company called the Patient Safety Movement Foundation. I got way too many pastries. I probably won't eat all of them on this because I just spoke to my nutritionist yesterday and I told her I did a mukbang, and she was like, she actually didn't judge me for it, which was really nice of her. So I got a frosted fudgy brownie. 7-Eleven has its own bakery. 7-Eleven is based in Irving, Texas. I don't know who represents Irving, Texas in the Congress. And then I got this pie for $1. Unbeatable in our economic times, especially for like me, because marketing's in a recession. Chocolate flavored snack pie. I could totally look up who represents Irving, Texas in Congress. Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne. Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne represents the 24th Congressional District of Texas. Thank you, Representative Beth Van Dyne. I really like 7-Eleven. So I used to work with the Patient Safety Movement Foundation in the pandemic, and I was helping them do thought leadership, like writing articles on behalf of their CEO. So the Patient Safety Movement Foundation, its focus is to educate people about patient safety, and they have all these worksheets for healthcare providers. They can avoid preventable deaths in the clinic, in the hospital. It's a lot of different things, like washing your hands, like having a culture of communication and not of silence and fear. The founder of PSMF, Joe Kiani, is actually a member of PCAST. So he's actually a member of the President's Council of Science and Technology Advisors. I never have talked to Mr. Kiani, but that's pretty cool that my former client is like on PCAST. Does that mean I'm more powerful? I think it's a win for patient safety, because especially after the pandemic, there was a lot of deaths and medical errors because there was so much medical care that was needed at scale. So I think it's great that our federal science, the decision-making science advisors are really focusing on patient safety, because the statistics are pretty insane. Like, if you and there's like so many sad stories, and I actually like wrote about a couple of them for Patient Safety Movement Foundation. I also wrote about a case that happened with a woman that went to get a diagnosis for long COVID, but no one could diagnose her, and there wasn't diagnostic standards at that time. So even though she had health insurance, she basically lost her life savings. So what does OSTP do? So they figure out and promote administration priorities. They do not make any science policy reforms. Like, I think a common misconception is that OSTP actually does something beyond just recommending stuff and providing reports. I'm going to talk about the judicial system and its intersection with science later, but I really want more of this honey bun. It's really good. It's definitely very substantive. So now I almost just like completely flipped my laptop. I'm glad that was off camera. No one needs to see that. So OSTP does things like it figures out the administration's priorities, and then it promotes them, and like it will write like a memo or like a report. It advises the White House and government agencies on SciComm. It does things like provide like an ideal science budget. It provides recommendations on what they think they should be funded by Congress. So Congress does the funding for science research, but OSTP provides recommendations. Like, nothing, they can't really like force Congress to fund the federal science agencies at the level that they recommend, but they definitely make recommendations like spend your money here, or like have these policy priorities, or like for like appropriations, because the way that our government is funded every year, it used to be funded like this, but I think it's no longer really funded like this. So every year there was like an appropriations bill. It's like, I'm really confused about this, and I've worked in Congress. Maybe it's just really complex. Maybe I'm an idiot. But like, It used to be that every year the Congress would develop a package and then they would pass it. But I feel like we also have this thing where we just continue to fund the government with continuing resolutions. So I'm not like a huge appropriations nerd, but supposedly OSTP plays a role in appropriations. White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. They, as I mentioned, they figure out and promote administration priorities. They advise the White House and government agencies on science communication. They provide like an ideal science budget. They can't actually write laws because that happens in the legislative branch, but they can work with other branches of government. And I've heard working in the White House is really stressful. I've actually read Kellyanne Conway's book. She wrote a book about her work to elect Donald Trump, and she talks about the White House, and it's apparently like really chaotic and busy in there. I really wonder if it's as chaotic and busy as the House. I assume it's definitely way more chaotic and more busy than the House. I actually applied to intern in OSTP and I got 2 interviews. So the first time I interviewed for the science division, and then I talked to this guy, and he was Obama's science advisor. And actually, like, I learned that the DC science policy world is like very small, and so I ended up like finding this person, being in my like shared like network of like science policy people years later, where he like no longer works for Obama, but it's really, I think that they have a lot of work in OSTP, even though they don't really have any like power to do anything. But I told the guy that was interviewing me, I was like, oh, I'm from Oklahoma. And he was like, oh, you're from Oklahoma? Because Oklahoma back then, around in the Obama administration, Oklahoma it was represented by 2 people. It was like, I want to say like Tom Coburn and who was the other person? Senator Inhofe. Senator Inhofe like famously brought a snowball to the Senate floor, and he was like, climate change isn't real because look at this snowball. So I don't think scientists like that very much. And I honestly think that like being from Oklahoma probably was not the greatest look for me in that interview, but it's like, what am I going to do? Like change where I am from? No. So I did not get that internship because like literally they were like, who are you? And I was like, well, I mean, didn't you already read my application? The second time I interviewed to be on PCAST, on the staff of PCAST, to like make a website for them. These internships are very competitive actually. And I have no idea how I got this interview. It was thanks to my advisor for writing me a letter of recommendation, like actually supporting me, but I didn't get it. And then I ended up leaving grad school that time. But I talked to this lady and she was like telling me about PCAST. And I had like vaguely heard about PCAST before from my public policy for scientists course and from everyone talking about OSTP. And like in my mind, I knew that OSTP is like the main place where science policy happens in the executive branch, like in the White House. This honey bun is also white, but it is not a house. It's really good. It's only like $1. I was thinking as I was getting my gas station snacks that I woke up this morning with $9 in my bank account. I was like, oh crap, because it's the end of year time. So luckily I made this mukbang fit into my budget. I still have one more to go tomorrow. But yeah, so I've never been to the White House. I actually tried to tour the White House and I never got to go there. But I was saying, so Kellyanne Conway wrote this, she wrote a book. So Kellyanne Conway's book is called Here's the Deal. And before you get mad at me for reading Kellyanne Conway's book, I will just say like it's actually like a pretty good book. So the problem with the executive branch in my mind is that people either love it or hate it because every few years we get a new president. And so every few years Washington, D.C. has like an entirely different culture. So for example, I lived in D.C. during the Bush years, during the Obama years, during the Trump years. I haven't been back for Joe Biden years, but the culture of the entire city changes so much because the people that are working there are so different. So during the Obama years, I felt like it was actually pretty fun to live there because, you know, Washington, D.C. is like 90% Democrat. It's like also, this is just very diverse. So I feel like that was a great time to live in Washington. Then during the Donald Trump years, when I was working in Congress, every day I would ride on the metro, and I feel like I was surrounded by the crankiest people alive that just didn't like Donald Trump. The people that you see in it's the people that you see in DC match the political atmosphere. It was really weird. Like, I'm from Oklahoma, which is a very deeply Republican state. And so when I got my internship, I rented a van, I packed up all my belongings and put it in my van, and then I drove it to Bethesda, Maryland, where I would be in a hotel, which I thought I would move out, but I actually did not move out. But when I got there, I was like, why does this whole city feel kind of Republican? It was really bizarre. And then I learned that Republican people that were working in Republican campaigns were feeling marginalized because DC is so heavily Democrat that they just didn't fit in there. And I was just like, that makes sense. So the White House things are very fast paced. And if you read Kellyanne Conway's book, which you may want to read it if you're in communications, because it actually is like brilliant. Because when you think about what Kellyanne Conway helped do for Donald Trump, helped mobilize the vote of women when running against a women presidential candidate, it was really hard work. But then there are very few pollsters that are at the level of Kellyanne Conway. So I don't know what the Democrat equivalent of Kellyanne Conway is. And she obviously helped elect the president. Then she worked in the White House. And I guess in the White House, it's like Congress, but I think it must be even more chaotic because the president's always making decisions and making speeches. I've also read the memoir of one of Obama's speechwriters because I don't limit myself when I'm reading. I love political memoirs, especially for communications professionals in politics, regardless of what party they're on. I definitely recommend right now, I went to a bookstore and I saw the clearance rack and I found a book from Dana Perino, who was actually a White House. She was the communications during the Bush administration. And I don't think I could even vote back then, but I picked up her book. It was only $3, so I'm going to read that and actually learn a lot about communications because if you think about it, if you work in the White House, things are constantly happening. You get a lot of pushback. You have to be really good in crisis communications. So how does that relate back to science policy in the White House? Well, so as far as I know, so we've never had a scientist president that I know of. I mean, Joe Biden founded the Cancer Moonshot Initiative. There's a lot of every president has hope that they have all liked science. I've never known an overtly anti-science president. If you want to be nonpartisan about it. What has OSTP done? Hold on, let me take another bite of this. So OSTP has 6 core teams: climate and environment, energy, health outcomes, national security, science and society, and technology. And it also supports a bunch of other things like the president and first lady's cancer moonshot, because as I mentioned, Joe Biden developed the cancer moonshot, which I think is pretty cool because if you think about, so the cancer moonshot basically is like an initiative. I don't know how they got the funds, but because OSTP they can't set aside funds, but they can tell Congress to set aside funds. So Joe Biden had the cancer moonshot. Obama had the brain initiative. If you look back throughout history, there's tons of examples of mobilizing efforts on the executive level to solve challenges like the Manhattan Project, the moon landing, all of that stuff, all done through sort of mechanisms like this. There's a congressional library where I live, and I visited it, and I looked through the archives, and you can see the letters that people wrote to NASA about funding science. And one guy was like, don't you think funding science is a huge waste of time? Funding a moon landing is a huge waste of time. One other person was like, when you go to the moon, make sure to put an oil thing on there so you can drill for oil there. So these are Oklahomans' takes on the moon landing, I guess. It's if you can think of social media right now where you can write whatever you want on the internet. I think those letters to NASA were the equivalent of that. So anyway, So OSTP also has a Cancer Moonshot, PCAST, as I mentioned, the President's Special Science Advisors, Science and Technology Advisors, National Science and Technology Council, which is another one, the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Office, which I guess must be really relevant right now in the era of ChatGPT, the National Quantum Coordination Office, the National Nanotechnology Coordination Office, and the Arctic Executive Steering Committee. Do I know what those do? Not really, because I don't spend too much time like thinking about OSTP, honestly, but they do a lot. They do a lot of like advising and recommending stuff, and also writing reports on stuff. Like they did a report, that very famous report on forensic evidence, that and scientific credibility of forensic evidence. They've done, let's see what reports they've done. Let me see if I can Google this. OSTP reports. So some of their most recent reports include vision, needs, and proposed actions for the bioeconomy initiative, National Space Weather Strategy, U.S. Ocean Justice Strategy, building computational literacy through STEM education, open access publishing. So they did a report to Congress on financing mechanisms for open access publishing of federally funded research. So they kind of have their pulse on all of these different issues in science and technology policy, and they just like write reports and advise people. They can advise Congress, they can advise federal agencies. OSTPs, the director of OSTP has to be confirmed by the Senate, and right now the director of OSTP is Arati Prabhakar. I probably did not say that right, but she also serves as assistant to the president for science and technology. She's in the president's cabinet. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. And she's also co-chair of PCAST, the Science and Technology Advisors. This is all from the OSTP website. You can go to whitehouse.gov/OSTP and find this information. And it changes every time there's a new president. Obviously, the executive offices change. OSTP doesn't go away. I forgot who the chair of OSTP was during the Trump administration, Kelvin Drogemeyer. So OSTP was established by the National Science and Technology Policy Organization and Priorities Act of 1976. So I guess it was established by a congressional act. So before OSTP, as I mentioned, presidents going back to FDR had various like forms of science advisors. They had committees and White House offices dedicated to science and technology. So how can scientists, hold on. I'm a mess. How can scientists get involved in executive branch science policy? Well, I mean, honestly, compared to the legislative branch, the executive branch science policy is much more structured. Like there's actually a science and technology policy office. That's one way you could work directly in the White House. But that seems very, very like not possible for most people. Like I lived in Washington, D.C., so it was not unfathomable for me to get an internship there. I just feel like it's easier to get an internship if you're already living in DC, and that's why I moved to DC also. So the main way you can get involved in executive branch science policy is by helping elect a president that supports your science policy goals. So whenever there's a presidential election, instead of not voting, I guess there was this thing on the internet recently about like not voting and how it's cool to not vote. But not voting is also a choice that you make. And if you choose not to vote for someone, then you can't be mad when the person doesn't get elected. And not even just voting for that person. I would say I've worked on tons of campaigns, House of Representatives, local government, Senate, president, you name it. You're like, oh, I'm a broke grad student. I have like $5. Well, you don't have to be like a rich super PAC to influence the government. If you really want to elect a president that has your values, the best thing to do is to take some time to volunteer for that presidential candidate. Like, so today, as I'm recording, it's December 22nd, 2023. I actually have a countdown on my phone to see how many days the next election is happening in. 74 days until the presidential primaries. Whenever candidates have science platforms, like, so there's a lot of issues that are involved science and technology. let's see, who's running for president right now? I'm going to Google who is running for president. There's a lot of people running for president. There's 7 Republican candidates as of now. As of December 4th, according to this Axios article that I found, there's 7 candidates for Republicans, 4 candidates for Democrats, and 3 candidates that are independent. I think a lot of times scientists like to complain about politics, but then they don't do anything about it. And then I feel like they're blindsided whenever something happens and they complain about it every day, but they didn't realize they could go do something about it. Or maybe they feel like they're above society and they don't want to do something about it, or like they vote and that's it. But beyond voting, there's also like political engagement. It doesn't matter if you live on a coast like I did and where everyone's liberal and sort of like academic elites, or if you live in kind of a flyover state like I do now and you're surrounded by Republicans, or people that have different political views than you. There's always points of agreement, and science and technology is like a huge area of agreement for people, because there's no Republican science or Democratic science. It's all the same. It's all the same science. So if you're a scientist and you're a scientist, you're a grad student, you're undergrad, there's nothing more fun than working on a political campaign, especially a presidential campaign, because everyone knows about your candidate. I've worked on Senate campaigns that are very local, and I've worked on presidential campaigns. And so I went door to door for a presidential campaign in grad school with people at Georgetown, and that was really fun. It's kind of a lot of work, but I went to Alexandria, Virginia, to help elect Obama, and also Tim Kaine, who back then was running for Senate in Virginia. That was pretty fun. I don't stick to one particular political party, just whoever has the best issues. So I also helped put Gary Johnson on the ballot, who's a libertarian candidate here in Oklahoma. There was record turnout that year. And guess what I drank every day before I went canvassing? A huge 7-Eleven coffee. Back then, there were a lot of people that were like not sold on Donald Trump. And I think those people voted for Gary Johnson and Weld. So that was pretty fun. So I've worked on presidential campaigns for like independents and Democrats. Because that's the beauty of democracy. You can have whatever political views you want. You can get shamed for it, but at the end of the day, everyone is free to have their own opinions, as long as they're not harming other people, which you could probably argue that policies do have like huge harms of other people. But anyway, yeah, so I think that my call to action for all people watching this, everyone that's watching this, definitely sign up to volunteer for a political campaign. Actually, it's easier than ever now. You can just like sit at your house, make calls on whatever software they have to make calls. I've definitely participated in like way too many presidential or campaigns. If you're interested, if you want to re-elect Joe Biden, go sign up and knock doors for Joe Biden, because I just read his numbers are like terrible right now, because I'm not sure why, but numbers are always terrible going into the presidential election. So this is the perfect time for you guys to get involved in political organizing. That's all I have to say about the executive branch of the government. Drinking coffee really helps understand the complexity of it all. Stay tuned for the judicial system. My take on the judicial system is influenced by like being on mock trial. I have never been president of anything. Oh, I have been president of some things. I've been vice president of the Society for Neuroscience, DC chapter. If you're a scientist, and you can literally volunteer for whoever you want, and you don't have to answer to anyone. Just like whoever you think is the most pro-science candidate. Maybe that's a Republican person. What's the advantage of doing that? Well, whenever you do that, you help science topics get more talked about. It levels the playing field. It forces candidates to talk about science. That's what the Koch brothers do, and they're also MIT graduates, so maybe we're both just evil. So yeah, thanks for watching my ramble on the executive branch. As I mentioned, I've never worked in the executive branch, though I have interviewed to work in the executive branch. I get the impression that things go really quickly in the executive branch as well, but they're at least more structured for science. So shout out to OSTP. I wanted to become an OSTP influencer because I saw that all my personal finance people I follow on Instagram are becoming like influencers with Joe Biden and his plan to improve the economy. So I was like, well, maybe I can be an OSTP influencer, but I don't think they have that. So peace. Thanks for watching my video. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the Fancy Comma YouTube so you don't miss any of our future YouTubes.